Time to kick off. Thanks for joining us today on the webinar. Good afternoon to our panelists, and good afternoon to people that are joining from near and far. And joining us today on the first of ADAPT Centre's 2022 Creating Tomorrow's World series of webinars. So I hope you've got the coffee at the ready and are looking forward to, as much as I am, to tuning in to our panelists later in the session. So my name is Edmund O'Connor, and I look after the industry engagements with the ADAPT Centre, which is Ireland's Science Foundation of Ireland Research Centre. And we work in the area of AI, digital content technologies, and with over 300 researchers from across 8 universities in Ireland working across multiple domains. So ADAPT is very much about pioneering new, I suppose, human-centric AI techniques and technologies, including personalization, in the area of natural language processing, data analytics, intelligent machine translation, right through to HCI, human-computer interaction, as well as working on various bodies nationally and internationally on standards for data governance, privacy, and ethics for digital content. So this is the first of our ADAPT webinars for 2022, and it builds on our 2021 series of webinars. Over 2021, over a number of months, we discussed everything from AI, machine learning, right through to data governance again, and e-health and fintech and ADAPT's startup innovation ecosystem. And you'll find links to those webinars on our website, adaptcentre.ie. But this afternoon, it's all about data governance, which is a very broad topic, but we're looking forward to discussing with our panelists some of their experiences, challenges, and opportunities in this space through perhaps hopefully some practical use cases. So one of the major trends we've seen over the last while is that, I suppose, data governance advances have moved beyond it being a check mark as pressure increases for companies to satisfy regulatory compliance through the increase in government regulation through GDPR or CCPA, and the spotlight on AI as new compliance regulations emerge, particularly with the EU draft AI regulation that is ongoing at the moment. And so compliance will very much demand probably an ability to know what data you have, where it is, and who has access to it. So with that, I'm delighted to welcome our panelists who are going to explore some of their experiences and perhaps touch on some of those touch points. Today we have Professor Markus Helfert, who is the Principal Investigator at ADAPT and Professor of Digital Service Innovation at Maynooth University. Markus is also the Director of the Science Foundation of Ireland Research Programme on Data Governance called Empower, which was launched in 2021. And his research includes everything from smart cities, IoT-based smart environments, building information management, right through to enterprise architecture and business process management. And then we have David Corrigan, who is the General Manager of Data Governance, Quality and Privacy at Informatica. Informatica is an American software company and it's headquartered in California. And David is dialing in from Canada today. And Informatica served many of the Fortune 100 companies, enabling them to transform data using their intelligent data management cloud, which is powered by AI, and it's dedicated to really managing data of any type, pattern, complexity, or workload across any location on a single platform. And not least, we have joining us is Tony Shannon, who's the Head of Digital Services in OGCIO, which is the Office of the Government Chief Information Officer. And Tony has led the implementation of a number of digital government services. Most recently, he's worked on the digital COVID certificate and all of the data protection impact assessments surrounding it, as well as the development and design of the national gov.ie portal. So a huge breadth of experience and depth of experience across all 3 panelists. So really looking forward to sort of kicking this off. And on that note, if I can turn to my first panelist, Markus, if I could pass that over to you, and hopefully you should have access to be able to present.
Okay. Thanks, Edmund, and I presume you can see my screen now?
And
perfect. And thanks for the kind introduction. Does that work? No.
Yeah, you're not in presenter mode yet, but we can see your screen, and there you are.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so thanks for the kind introduction. As Edmund said, I'm professor in Maynooth University on digital service innovation, and I'm also leading the Empower Data Governance program in Ireland, multi-million program around the topic data governance. So I thought towards the end of my short presentation, I talk a little bit about the data governance program, what the ambition and what topics we are trying to address, but also for my own research. So data management and data governance is one of my core themes, which for many years I always focused on, and it didn't go away. It actually got more complicated, more complex, but also more exciting, because suddenly we have more technology, better technologies, and also more data which we can avail of, but also at the same time we need to cater for more expectations, also, for example, responsibility involving users. So the whole environment on data management became far more complex than many years ago when I started my research around data management and data quality. In the background of data warehousing, integration was an important topic, and it is still an important topic. So I thought actually kind of thinking about why I'm still interested in data management, data governance, if there are so many frameworks around. So I just listed one well known over the years, the DAMA framework, which lists in that wheel several aspects what we would see as important around data governance. For example, data quality, metadata management, master data management, data integration, data privacy. And suddenly it became far more important to consider what we now know as data governance. And so in essence, I think data volume, the complexity and the requirements on privacy, compliance increased significantly. At the same time, also what we can do with data and how we can analyze that. So AI components, predictive models, hybrid data approaches. So suddenly also the opportunity and the flexibility requirements increased, and that called for a more approach on actually just data management. But also when we look at what we can do now with data, it calls also for responsibility, for ethical approaches, for compliance. Data privacy is one of the important aspects on it. So the change in these user expectations is an important aspect. So now what we have to do is bringing all these various aspects, the possibilities with the expectations together, and still making it work for companies, for organizations, for the data ecosystem to provide some value. Value might be in the society, might be commercial value, might be insights into better decisions, and even to value data is a big topic around. So to me, it's important that we on the one side ensure the flexibility to provide additional opportunities, but on the other side also provide structures, ways of govern best practices around data governance, so to actually make it efficient and effective around that. So to reduce risk, to increase compliance, and also to avail of the value of the data. So, for example, establish new revenue streams or cost reduction, and we need to balance the various aspects around data governance. So, and to make that work, one topic which I'm particularly interested in is automating data governance or automated data governance. So to use some technologies, advanced technologies, for example, process mining or artificial intelligence prediction models, to optimize and automate data governance and data management aspects. So for example, to empower maybe less technical users to still manage data, to help understand insights into data, reduce the manual tasks. So for example, almost half of the task, according to Gartner, can be automated around data management. Also data quality controls. Data quality is still an important aspect. Reduce or resolve data quality issues in that integration. Also semantic, metadata management, data quality rules, all of this can be automated. Compliance, and also when we consent, when withdraw of consent, to manage this consent mechanisms around this. Without automation, we will not scale with the data around this. Also, for example, when we share data among organizational boundaries or even between countries, privacy preserving technology. So to really ensure the privacy rights, but enabling still data sharing are important. Also understanding data flows, data usages, where data is actually transferred, the transparency around this. So without technology, without these advanced technologies, we will not scale on this. And one aspect that I'm with my team looking into is using process mining technologies to understand data flows, to model that, and then ensuring compliance with the data flows. And that becomes then an automated way of data management to manage large-scale data flows. So, and that's embedded in one of the big programs what we launched last year in Ireland, the Empower Data Governance Program, funded and funded by Science Foundation Ireland and co-funded by industry. And for the first time, we brought 4 big research centers together. ADAPT is one of them. Also Insight on data analytics, Future Neuro, and Lero. So all the 4 centers working together to bring an interdisciplinary research program, research agenda around the important topics of data governance together. And I thought I show a little bit about the 5 streams what Empower, what the data governance program looks at. It's an interdisciplinary program. So in the middle, you see the technology side. So for example, artificial intelligence or privacy preserving technologies, but it goes far reaching. So on the left side of this, you see also the business aspects, data markets, data values, how to monetize data, how to set up business models based on data, capabilities of data management. So the whole aspects of data markets, business aspects around this. The regulation and regulatory sandboxes, so areas and understanding regulation and the impact of regulations on data governance. And then on the right side, see governance standards, how we can contribute, shaping leading standards on data governance, best practices around data governance, also data quality aspects, how to measure, how to set up service level agreements. And then on the far right side, user-centric design, ethical aspects, compliance, responsibility. And so all of these different disciplines, from user-centric technology to business aspects, we brought together with the Empower program on data governance. And I'm quite excited about the opportunities, the research aspects, and linking with the research communities on these 4 centers together and bringing really the expertise to it, to show and to look at best practices. How can we address these challenges, the complexity, the flexibility, and using the approaches in the various aspects, and understanding how good practices, how data governance can be working and can be linked to address these challenges. So, and I leave it to this for the moment. I know we have afterwards a panel discussion, but I just thought a little bit of insight into the Empower research program and into my own research area.
Thanks very much, Markus. That was great. And we'll certainly pick up on some of those points later on. And certainly you can see that shift in data governance over the last while, where it's very much been driven now about that user-centric design, user expectations, and that idea of consent management. You know, what am I sharing and how am I sharing and what value am I getting from my data, which I know is some of the principles around Empower and the Empower Research Centre. But it leads us nicely on to, and I should say before I pass the mic, so to speak, over to David, is that if you have any questions, please put them on the Q&A at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and we'll try and pick up some of those questions at the end of the session. And if we don't, we'll certainly follow up thereafter. On that note, if I could pass over to David. David, you should have now access to be able to present.
Yes, thank you, Edmund. Hopefully you're seeing my screen now.
We are indeed.
Wonderful. Well, that was a great lead-off presentation. I'm going to pick up on some of the themes that Markus had covered. And I'm going to come at this from a point of view of, what has been commercialized? What are organizations doing, and what are we trying to drive forward here at Informatica? And our mission is bold but simple: autonomous data management. And that drags us pretty far forward. Sometimes we get to augmented data management for some capabilities and augmenting what humans can do. But our goal is to be autonomous, and we think that we can absolutely get there with AI. One thing that we've observed in the market is there's different types of users of data. There isn't just one data type of persona, from technical users on the left to more business-oriented or casual users on the right. And the population of those users on the right is much higher than the ones on the left, right? The ones that need data but aren't necessarily deep in terms of understanding data. That's really an opportunity for a self-service model, something that Markus was talking about. And a lot of automation that we look at in data management has been driven from that point of view of, well, how can we automate finding data in all these various systems? We're storing it and understanding it and providing it to those people that need it on the right-hand side, and automating those manual tasks, as Markus was talking about. But there's an equally interesting opportunity to learn from consumption patterns. One of the things, even before we were talking about AI, that's always true and a risk in IT is that we will build it and we hope that they will come. So we make assumptions and we provide things and we say, here it is, here's the data, you can now use it, only to find a business user saying, well, I still find it difficult to look for that data in a data lake, and I'm not a power user, and so there's all sorts, and that isn't the data that I wanted, and I actually want it combined with another data set, and so on and so forth. So learning from consumption patterns, and there's much that can be automated from those consumption patterns, actually informs the type of automation that you need to provide data in the first place. It's both supply and demand that you need to look at from a data management point of view. And if we look at this a little bit more deeply, there's what do those business users want to do? They want to have business applications where they're gaining insights, self-service data access, to drive deep analytic type of insights, and use AI for a competitive advantage. And what sits underneath that is data. And every organization struggles with this exact same problem on either a small or a large scale. Data's in all sorts of silos. It's fragmented. It's not described the same way. It's hard to find. So when you want to put a layer on top of it of, well, let's make it easy to find data and let's govern it and have policies about that and privacy, ensure privacy, it's difficult to do if you don't understand the data in the first place. And that's really been our thesis at Informatica, that data management begins with data. And I know that sounds like a ridiculously simple and straightforward thing to say, but you can't get to those data-centric kind of applications if you don't understand the data completely and thoroughly in the first place. And that's what we've dedicated a lot of our engineering towards doing: discovery and understanding of data, ingestion of data, and then curating and preparing and understanding it, obviously understanding the quality profile of it so it can be cleansed and more trusted, and then governed. So governance policies associated to data types and business definitions of data, as well as protection policies, and so on and so forth. But with data management and each of those separate disciplines comes some level of manual work. Even if you automate some of the tasks, often there's still work to be done, to be reviewed by a human, or a suggestion is made for automation, but a human being or a manager or a data steward needs to approve it. And that manual work with data tools still represents a lot of work. And as most organizations are saying, I want to use all of my available data, well, that dwarfs the number of people that they have, even with augmented individual data management capabilities to address it. And that's what we've really focused on and trying to build with Informatica. Our brand name for it, we call it CLAIRE, brings clarity to data with AI, essentially, artificial intelligence. But it also means automation and intelligence. We focus on automating the data management tasks, but also getting smarter about what's happening, so and making recommendations. And this is where that consumption pattern kind of comes in. Understanding how people are using data and putting that, to good work in terms of making better recommendations in terms of how they can use the data. And there's many things that we built and automated. We're tremendously proud of what we've done, but we also acknowledge that we're just getting started on what we can do for data management here. These are some of the pre-built automations that we have within our intelligent data management cloud and that our clients are using. Things that range from data management type automations, so inferring schemas. I'll start on the left-hand side, associating business rules, inferring data lineage, where did data come from, and how do we put it together in sort of an end-to-end flow, which is incredibly important when a user decides if they want to trust data. Doing column similarity and entity matching and data set similarities, classifications of data, domain descriptions of data. And over the years, we started building quite a few of these as intelligent rules. And then as we went, we said, well, no, these need to be trainable. So our clients can actually train these with their own data and have a different behavior, because it's not one size fits all. And that's the benefit of ML. You can train it with your own data sets. I'll pick one example to go a little bit deeper on so that this doesn't just remain sort of at a high level. Let's talk about entity matching, the process of matching two data records together. In this case, I'll talk about Dell, an interesting case study where they wanted to match prospect and customer data. And their objective from a business point of view is, we send too much marketing material, helter-skelter to all of our prospects. And sometimes our prospects are our customers and we're not aware of that. And we're sending things that are not appropriate because they already bought that product, or maybe they have a service ticket open on that product and they're not happy with us. And sending an email marketing message, it's like the wrong time to do that sort of thing. Well, in order to solve that business problem, you have to match all of those entities together, from your marketing databases and your digital data on your website and your campaign lists, with your customer files and your ERP systems and your operational data warehouses. And in the case of Dell, they had 6 billion rows of data to match together into what they wanted to have as a customer 360. And traditional data management techniques, which augmented data management, or augmented human work, I should say, would still create hundreds of thousands, actually there's millions of, I think this might be a match, but a human being needs to decide on it. That is way too much work for any organization to take on. And we were able to help them out with Claire and our entity matching, where they focused on doing match training with both business and IT users, training the algorithm on their unique decision making. Essentially, here's a pair, two David Corrigans. Are they a match or not? And they could decide if it was, or what their level of confidence was. And then the system learned from those decisions and it readjusted the algorithms for the various scenarios, such as, oh, well, if the email address actually got filled in on a website and a marketing site, I don't trust it quite as much as I do coming from like the Salesforce application. These are the types of questions that I've tried to ask customers for years as a practitioner, like where you get in a room and you say, let's weight it all out and tell me what the probabilities and the weights are for these decisions. And no human can express that, because it's just not something that you can express to say, then if the email address came from such and such a system, let's knock it down to 0.783 probability. You don't know. But you can learn from decisions. And that's what's really exciting about the machine learning opportunity here. The outcome, they actually reduced their potential matches by 98%. 800,000 match pairs were completely eliminated. They either were or were not a match. So that the match algorithm was really finely tuned and trained. But what's also interesting is privacy, which is one of the other topics that we wanted to talk about. Not only are you matching and saying, hey, that's the same David Corrigan, well, in what context? In the context of me sending an email to David, maybe I am allowed to merge those two records together. Maybe not if it's crossing across commercial and retail business, because I need consent in order to do that. So privacy needs to be factored in. In the end, Dell actually produced 6 different customer views, each one applicable for a different use case. For marketing campaigns, for sales and operations, they had 3 different views that they comprised for compliance. Different match weights, different rules for when you combine, and different rules of visibility. Essentially, what data do you share for those profiles? As you can imagine, it's very complex, not just the scale, but all the rules and the ability for machine learning to automate that. it was a game changer. I could tell you how many hours they saved, but it'd almost be ridiculous because the real story is they wouldn't have been able to do it with human beings. And that's really, I think, what excites me about the power of AI and data management. And that's just on one client's database and training it within their implementation. The real power of this and where it starts to get exponential is where you have a community type approach. The ability to take data from multiple enterprises and to have it in one metadata and data repository. So you can use that to build additional sort of machine learning algorithms and AI algorithms and train the system. And that's what we're focused on. And obviously this has a big, big emphasis on privacy. So customers have to consent to want to do this and share the data. And they have all sorts of questions of that environment must be secure. It's one-way traffic. Nobody sees anybody else's data. It's a private data lake for us developing these AI and ML algorithms. In some cases, the data may need to be obfuscated and masked in some way, but you need to do it in an intelligent way that it doesn't impact what you're trying to do with AI and ML, right? You can't just take a blunt force method and do that. And this is where you start to develop much better automations and pre-built capabilities and insights so that clients actually get beyond that augmented. Even if you have ML, you still have to train it. Well, what if it was trained by the wisdom of the crowd? And in order to do that, obviously, there's a big aspect of privacy, which I know is a topic that we want to discuss more here. And clients have to be comfortable that their data is being treated safely and securely, and then they benefit from that essentially the wisdom of many instead of the wisdom of one. So with that, Edmund, let me turn it back to you for our next presenter, and thank you.
That's great, David. Thanks very much. And I do like that use case of Dell. It's a fascinating use case, and actually it shows also the complexity of what's involved, and actually that's under the hood of the Claire platform. But and that idea of almost crowdsourcing of ideas amongst enterprise, and then trying to balance that sort of tension between what am I sharing and what am I getting back, and utility versus privacy, which is always a fascinating sort of context. Thanks for that, David. That leads us on to nicely to our final presentation today, to Tony. Tony, and as I say, and as I said, if you have questions, please put them down in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen, and we'll try and address them towards the end of the presentation. So Tony, if you are there, I'd like to hand over the mic to yourself. I can just see you coming online, Tony. Now, that's great. I can see your screen, Tony. We just don't have, you might be on mute. So just bear with us for a moment as we just get Tony up and running. I dare say that Tony doesn't want me to deliver his presentation. Tony, I'll save you. Tony, can you hear me? I will give Tony a moment and see if we can. Yeah, we can.
Can you hear me now, Edmund?
I can indeed, Tony. When we can see your screen.
Okay, right. Sorry about that. I do have an issue with with Zoom not liking this, or sorry, this PC not being a big fan of Zoom. But anyway, I'm connected, and hopefully you can see my slides.
We can indeed.
Okay, great. So yeah, I'm just going to try to cover some material related to the agenda you've got today from a slightly different angle, if that's okay. I was just asked to present a bit about the work that we're doing in digital services here in the government, in the Office of the Government CIO, and talk about the digital work as well as the data angle on it. And so let me just take you through a couple of slides on that. Okay, I'm just changing slide. Okay, yeah, you can see that slide change, I hope.
Yeah, we can.
Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so yeah, my role is head of digital services here in the Office of the Government CIO. So I don't look after the data governance side of things. but I do look after the digital side. And just let me tell you then about the work that I'm doing and how it relates to the agenda item you've got today. So I was explain the work that we're trying to do, particularly now after surviving through the COVID pandemic, is obviously to build on the transformation that we've seen from the COVID pandemic to try to build back a better set of services across the public sector for everybody in Ireland. And that's really the focus of this team here around the digital service team in OGCIO. Just before I get into the work that I'm doing here, I'll just talk to you a little bit about my own background for a minute. So I'm actually a medical doctor by background, and so from 20 years of practice, the pain, if you like, and suffering that's caused at the front line by the issue of data management not being as optimized as it could or it should be, and that's an international problem across healthcare. But it, I suppose, kind of points to the challenge that is there between, the professional responsibilities that I had as a doctor around protecting privacy and confidentiality with the dearth of data sharing that was not done as well as it should be to try to build a more patient-centric record, for instance, So I think obviously I'm coming at this from a background of obviously being professionally trained in the importance of data privacy and confidentiality, but knowing from the clinical front line that data sharing is holding patient improvement back. So anyway, that's just a bit about my background. And in OGCO, where I now work, I'm looking after the digital services portfolio, which is essentially only part of a broader range. And essentially the data element, if you like, is another building block, and we have other building blocks around infrastructure and governance, if you like, as well. We know that digital is a high priority topic, with the government moving to talk about harnessing digital, and the Digital Ireland framework just publicised in the last few weeks talks about the importance of that. Are you seeing my slide? Can you?
No, I was just going to find an opportune time. Actually, we can't. We've just lost a visual of your screen, so I'm not sure what that is. We can hear you perfectly, and it's fine, but we've just.
Okay, we did have a backup plan, which is
there you are.
I had my deck. So I might just, you can see the OGCO slide, perhaps?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so the next slide then is harnessing digital, which is around talking about the All Ireland framework that we have, which is about, calling out the need for digitalization of public services. And that's a major challenge for the decade ahead. The next slide talks about the Civil Service Renewal Plan for 2030, and essentially calling out digital first as a plan for the civil service to be changed and transformed over the next 10 years by putting digital at the heart of what we do. And at a European level, the next slide talks about the once-only principle, where data is only collected once at the point of where it's needed, and that shouldn't be shared unless it's necessary, and again, there should be reduction and duplication of information and data capture. The next slide talks about, our challenge around building back better, and the role of digital transformation therein. Also, the complexity in the next slide and the size and scale of the challenge. And then I'll just stop on the change challenge around people, process, and technology. And again, just check you can see that slide, okay? Can you see that slide?
Yes, I can indeed, yeah.
Okay, let me just pause on this one, because essentially, obviously, we've been talking about obviously the key role of machine learning and AI, if you like, in trying to change things for the better here. And you won't mind me saying that obviously any change involves a dimension of people and process and technology change, and clearly technology is the big disruptor here. But we do know that organizational culture and the people in the process element often kind of get in the way of that technology disruption. So that's the kind of balancing act we're trying to get through at the moment, I think, in terms of the public sector changing its educating its people to improve the process and using technology wisely in that. And I think the way to do that is obviously try to break down some of the organizational boundaries and focus on what's best for the citizen in many ways rather than what's best for the individual organizational unit. Okay, next slide. We're just talking a look about digital services, and that's the area that I particularly look at, where we look at the cycle of change management and software engineering. And then next slide looks at data governance, and we've already heard talk of the DAMA model and the role of the many facets of that wheel of data governance, if you like, and there are many dimensions to it. I just focus on a couple. Next slide talks about, and this comes from the last version of the strategy, that citizens, if you like, and their data is important to us. We shouldn't be asking them to tell us what we already know. We should be using their data appropriately and transparently, and particularly try to maximize the value of the data and being able to reuse data that we already have, as opposed to asking people for the same data many times. Next slide talks about, obviously, the elements of the data stream here. That is the new Data Sharing and Governance Act that's coming into place at the moment, a rated data governance board that's being set up, data strategy, data catalog, data rooms, and a shift to open data. So there's a whole team here that are dedicated to the data strategy here, in terms of how we change the way that's done across the public sector. So the data strategy, obviously, we need to acknowledge the current problems in terms of data duplication and lack of reuse. And the shift, to better data quality, duplication, reduction, more reuse, and that's been done through a variety of means: the legislation, the setting up of base registries, and particularly the idea of standards and common solutions, which will mean that we're trying to get away from organizational silos, as I mentioned, and move to more common approaches. And that includes, indeed, common approaches to the data sharing between departments, so that we're building standards-based approaches that are centered around the citizen. Okay, I'll just make sure you can see the gov.ie slide there, please.
Yeah, we can.
Okay, great. So that would just bring us back to where we're at the moment, if you like, and we're on a journey here. There's stuff that's going well and stuff that plenty of work to do. And obviously, a lot of the data work that I've mentioned is still in a relatively immature state, I think it's fair to say, across government, where still a lot of organizational silos that make that may protect data privacy on the one hand, and that's certainly a concern. People are not maybe aware that with GDPR they're wary of sharing data. But if we're trying to build citizen-centered services, and like we are here, then we have to kind of find a way of changing that. So gov.ie is aimed at being a one-stop shop for government information that's centered around the citizen rather than the department. And the next slide then takes us into where we're going in terms of digital strategy by building on gov.ie to a more seamless set of services. And I'll call those out, but essentially the idea is a set of services that are based around the citizens' needs as opposed to the government department. So if I look into the detail of what those 7 are, we're talking about standardizing across what we call a life events portal that enshrines the once only principle, and we're talking about making sure we have the digital identity, so we know who we're dealing with. We're talking about standardizing the way we manage content, standardizing the way we collect data to reduce the thousands of forms that are across government. Having some standards in the way we handle cases. We're looking at digital credentials in a digital wallet, because after all, most interactions with government are people looking for some kind of service or indeed evidence of entitlement, etc. And then areas around messaging and analytics. We'll go to the next slide, just to talk about our focus around digital services, digital credentials. This is one we see as particularly important in the sense that we want to kind of empower the citizen to take control over their own information and be able to use data from the public and the private sector to perhaps share their birth certificate and their driving license, to get a mortgage or whatever that may be. And so we're trying to break down the barriers between public and private here by looking at how we could do some work around digital credential type of service that would change the game, if you like, and change the way data is managed. Worth calling out here the sovereign identity approach for digital credentials, which is really about decentralizing, if you like, the way data is collected and stored, and essentially giving, the issuer a chance to, produce a verifiable credential to the holder, the citizen that would hold that, and they would then, be able to provide that credential, and the proof would be produced by kind of a triad of trust with the verifier of that same credential. So we are looking at a new dynamic in the way data is managed. If we're going to pull this off at all by decentralizing some of this at least, and it remains to be seen how that will be done. But the world is shifting in some ways at least to a more self-sovereign approach for data management that has interesting promise. I'll just talk for a minute as I close in about where we've got to with that in terms of the digital COVID credential, which is a de facto digital credential, if you like. It did have the benefit of EU regulation and legislation behind it to give it legal basis for the need for the sharing. The EU DCC was the form of a data standard that was minimized data, which kind of protected us, if you like. We were involved in consulting with the DPC and trying to make sure that the data was handled properly, and we made sure they were happy and to approve our work as we did it in haste, under pressure over the summer. And you may have come across the digital COVID cert checker that we had to put together in about a week to try to enable the reopening of society, hospitality. And the way we did that was we made sure that the data that was captured at the point of scanning was very much minimized. There's no personal identifiable information that was stored in any of the logs or anything like that. So that all meant that we've essentially managed to deploy a very high-scale digital certificate that obviously we would argue was kind of fairly central to the reopening of society and travel. And the interesting news there was that, we've now issued 7 million of those over the last number of months, and across a range of different types. And you see there the usage those certificates got over the period of the summer, peaking towards Christmas time, where we were getting over 1 million certificates being checked every day at various sectors. And then in the last month, now bottoming out because it's not required anymore. But I think it does give you a sense as to where we're going with digital services development. The balancing act that we're trying to achieve here between data or digital service improvement and maintaining data privacy, but data sharing as well. And we couldn't have done this without about 4 state government departments come together and about 10 market players come together, very much enshrined with a proper data governance around it. But trying to pull this off, I think it probably is a reasonable, interesting case study in data privacy and data sharing in action. Okay, and I will finish there, Edmund. And sorry again about the technical glitch, but hopefully you'll be able to follow along as I told that story. Back to you now. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. No, that was a fascinating sort of walk through, probably a journey that has probably sort of, whereas traditionally maybe incrementally sort of improvements in service through over the last 2 to 3 years over the pandemic has probably exponentially sort of increased significantly in terms of the pace. And actually probably your closing remark there probably sums it up. It's probably that sort of stakeholder engagement across all sort of sectors that managed to sort of bridge that transition and the speed, but it very much sort of comes to the core of even what Markus and David was talking about in terms of that use of data being appropriate, being minimalistic in terms of what we take in and transparent to the end user. But I can imagine the complexity around what you've been dealing with over the last 2 to 3 years has been quite significant. Thanks very much, guys, David, Markus, and Tony. That's just a great insight into a very different perspective, but at the same time, there's very much overlapping trends right through to actually that we can just take to just have a few minutes of a Q&A. There are a couple of questions that have come in. Tony, you can hear us okay?
Yes, I can. Yes, I can.
That's
if you can hear me, I can hear you.
Yeah, I can. Just say I don't see your screen, so that's fine. That's perfect. Just listen, folks. Just as a very quick opening question to each of you, there is a very real sense that given the proliferation of data privacy regulations over the last while, and which will continue to ratchet this year and over the next couple of years, alongside that sort of momentum, have you seen a real shift in the thought process? And I think Tony may have alluded to it in terms of culture, but at an executive level in terms of embracing that sort of change, you know, the way companies sort of are beginning to adopt or rethink their approaches, a greater awareness around that, because you still need that sort of culture and sort of management sort of buy-in to drive that momentum to moving it from I suppose what traditionally was perceived as a data management framework to something almost trying to rethink that business model in terms of incorporating it at the core of a business model or product development. Tony, to you first, just as your last there, is that something that is a challenge, or you're just seeing much more of an emphasis and focus around bridging that gap?
Well, I mean, obviously, as you say, COVID changed the dynamic here of working in certain key areas that, and as you know, I think it wasn't some famous Soviet who maybe should remain nameless today, but essentially, there are decades where nothing happened, and then weeks where decades happened, and essentially, that's what essentially happened with the COVID. I mean, the joined up working forced our hands to drive us all to work together to address that need. I think, I'm not in government long enough to know whether or not, what exactly it was like beforehand. But I mean, there's a concern I would have is that if we don't build on that crisis and, take advantage to continue to address the broader data sharing issues I mentioned around, all of the digital services we need to provide, that, people go back to their siloed departmental approaches to working. I think we shouldn't assume that everything is fixed now, that everybody's changing the way they work. I think there's still education that needs to be done, and particularly with GDPR, reducing the fear factor in sharing data. I think the other guys are probably better able to comment on the role of GDPR here, but I do see it as a kind of something that scares people here, as to trying to get the concerns about getting a breach and getting in trouble with the DPC as potentially something that might put some people off some of the data sharing that needs to be done. But maybe that's a bit I suppose controversial, but certainly I think there's room for plenty of improvement, and it's a lot of work to be done here yet.
Yeah, and David, to you too, I presume that's a slightly different perspective, but again, that is still core to talking to customers in terms of just making sure that they have an understanding in terms of what they're trying to discover, what they're trying to sort of classify, label, in terms of what's the business outcome to going through an automation or implementing a platform such as Claire.
Absolutely, Edmund. Just to build on Tony's comments as well there, and your question, there's definitely, I would say, a rising market perception and need and appreciation for privacy and sensitive data management. I think the shift that I've seen is that not only should an organization ought to be doing it, but they have to for various compliance reasons, but they're starting to see that it's impossible to do it just by pinpointing one area, saying, we'll discover data and sensitive data in our key systems or our source systems and lock it down. In this world of sort of big data and how we've set up our IT systems, data in an individual system at its source might not be personally identifiable information. It may have just my address, but not my name, not my telephone number. Suddenly that list gets combined with a marketing list that has my email address and IP, and when you combine it together in a lake or downstream for a campaign file or for some analytics, suddenly it is personally identifiable information. Suddenly I'm a marketing analyst who may be unfairly making offers or targeting customers in a particular geolocation with certain biases, and suddenly I could become accused of doing that and sort of unfair marketing sort of practices, which is happening in some financial services organizations when they're getting too precise with their sort of geo sort of targeting and offers that they make. And again, you have to manage the whole data landscape in order to do that. The other thing I wanted to comment on, though, it isn't just the executives that are saying, oh, we're going to get fined and we better do something about this. There's sort of a dark side to not making it obvious what sort of privacy you're doing as an organization. Of course, there's people in any organization that'll just grab data and run. But what doesn't get spoken about often enough is there are lots of people in organizations that are fearful of using data. And if you don't publish what you've actually done and make it obvious, let's say to me as a business analyst, oh, this data has been checked and secured and verified that it's not sort of PII data when I go browsing for it in a lake or some portal. If I don't know that, a lot of users say, they make their own judgment and they might make a very conservative judgment. And what ends up happening is they don't use data they could be using, and the insights suffer from that. From something as basic as just telling people what you've done to protect data. We often forget that in the rush to do AI and other things, but just publishing, this is what we've done to make it more trusted, makes a huge difference in data sharing.
That's interesting. And Markus, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, and absolutely. Also, from when we put the Empower program on data governance, the research agenda together, we had workshops with industry, multinational companies, but also small and medium. So your question was, Edmund, is it has it arrived on the C level in companies? Absolutely. I think also on the one side, the business opportunities and the opportunities on data sharing and putting different and even sharing across organizational boundaries, but also the user-centric, people-centric, responsible ethics, awareness, and far more than just being compliant. I think it's also good practice, and also if we want to share data, we need to establish a trustworthy environment where we can share this. So I think that kind of that seems to be a trade-off between business opportunity, trustworthy, compliance, but I think that's realized that it's actually an opportunity in itself. So if we establish a trustworthy environment with technology, where we can reduce the boundaries of sharing, it also provides huge business opportunities. And I definitely think this has arrived in companies, and it's discussed, and yeah.
Yeah, I suppose we can see that sort of reflected too, even in the last sort of 12 to especially 12, 18 months, where there's that great awareness, not only in terms of some of those comments that you mentioned, but also in terms of that idea of co-creation, almost that stakeholder engagement. You need a wider pool in order to look at various sort of solutions, where it's stakeholder engagement within the public sector, or within, from your perspective, Markus, is actually co-creating solutions with academia and industry partners, and being able to sort of, to create that greater almost brain trust to help solve some of those problems. I know actually that we are at 16:54, which is a shame, and we had said within an hour. I'd love to actually speak for an hour. There's a couple of questions that I want to ask very quickly, though, notwithstanding that it's 5:02, and I do appreciate people are moving within the hour. But there's a couple of just interesting questions that have been pinged, and I just thought might be worth. Tony, to you, if I may, in terms of this widespread adoption of tech-enabled care, using better data in better ways, is going to result in hopefully more integrated and prevention-focused care rather than just merely treating diseases. There's a question around in terms of, you have a much more diverse customer base than, say, perhaps David or Markus would be, in terms of some of the business challenges that they would be looking at, much more diverse, much more, some digital natives, some are not. That idea of question was asked around genuine inclusivity. How do you approach that, or how do you, what sort of questions do you ask in terms of building out those apps?
Well, if you're talking about, I suppose, how do you engage users in terms of diverse users, in terms of designing new services and looking at the digital and the data dimensions, my understanding really from the science is that if you, are doing, user-centered design, then, you can probably get a pretty good feedback on most of the key issues with kind of a dozen small groups of a dozen, as long as you choose them right, well, So, that's our initial starting point, is to try to, get a small bunch of kind of diverse users who are, interested in it. And obviously you've got like the National Disability Authority and some others that are interested in this who try to put those users forward, and we try to engage users in the service design work that we're doing, if you like. And obviously that helps a lot. I know pre-COVID, there were some of our team going into the offices of the likes of Intro, Department of Social Protection on the ground. We're talking to all kinds of users on the ground to just gauge their views and opinions. I remember being asked before about, whether there's an argument if we're, let's say, doing a national ID scheme or, some, trying to agree, national approaches to, the sharing of information. I think one idea that I've put out there in the past is the idea of a citizens' assembly. Ireland's led the world in terms of the role of a citizens' assembly in making some difficult decisions. And clearly, there's a lot of digital and data discussions to be had in this decade, given, the state's obligations, the market players' interest in this space, and people's concerns about the use of data. There's an argument, I think, for having a citizens' assembly about something like this in the fullness of time, but we're not there yet. But I wouldn't be surprised if over the next few years we see something like that happen,
All right, that's great, Tony. And actually a quick question, David, in terms of from the audience, in terms of, I suppose, some regulatory aspects of AI will likely include more sort of thorough audits of training data and algorithms, to identify areas where bias, I suppose, is this idea, and we mentioned it previously in a conversation about explainable AI, in terms of treating people unfairly or blocking people from certain products. Is this something that is a focus, or are we moving in that direction in terms of looking at what we can do in that area?
Absolutely. AI explainability, there's sort of two sides to the coin. There's explaining how the algorithm works, and then explaining the data that you use to train the algorithm, the data that you fed into it operationally, and the decisions that you made about what data you fed to it, which in itself could be a bias, for example, or how it was combined. So we've certainly focused a lot on the data explainability aspect of AI explainability, and making that completely transparent is something that right now I see organizations looking at it sort of in arrears. Oh, there was a question raised, now we look at it. But I do think it will start to shift to become part of the development process, a QA check almost, if you will, before an algorithm gets deployed. I don't think we're that far from seeing that as a standard practice.
Yeah, all right, okay, but something for the future.
Yes.
So just I'm just conscious of time. So just maybe as a final one quick question to each of you, starting with Markus, are there any product sort of initiative trends that are emerging, or that you foresee emerging over the next 12 to 18 months, or spearheading any major IT product or IT initiative that you can tell us about very quickly? Markus?
Yeah, I could just mention the Empower Data Governance Program. I think this is also that has the potential to really establish best practices on technology, but also on business. So really how data governance can be really working, and how we can really establish best practices around that.
That's great, Markus. And David?
Yeah, I think that, aside from some of the technologies that I mentioned, I think data observability is something that we'll start to see more and more, which is just an observation of not only data, but users, the systems that are storing data, and making that a lot more sort of obvious and automated to organizations. So we continue to focus on trying to innovate and lead and experiment as well here at Informatica. And there's so many different things. I think, as I mentioned, I think we've scratched the surface. So much more to be done for AI and data management.
Oh, that's great. Look forward to seeing it. And Tony, just by way of quick comment.
In terms of which now, sorry?
Sorry, do you see anything, any sort of trends or new sort of initiatives happening over the next 12 to 18 months that, that you could highlight?
Well, I think the work that we're doing on the Life Events portal is something that we hope will, bring some of this kind of citizen-centric thinking into focus. It's low key at the moment, but I think it's an area to watch closely. That's
all right. That's great. Listen, guys, that's been fantastic. It's been a great insight into each of your spaces, and I certainly could go on for another hour actually just listening to, and there's different sort of parts of that we could sort of expand on in later webinars for sure. But unfortunately, we have sort of promised attendees about an hour, so I just want to thank Markus and David and Tony for your time. It's been fantastic. So just a quick wrap up. I hope you enjoyed listening to the review of our panelists, and certainly a recording of that will be shared by email in the days and weeks to come. There's no doubt that 2022 will continue to see increased momentum, certainly with data governance being very much at the core of business models, and these are areas that certainly Adapt is working on with our industry partners, how to make sense of the vast amounts of data within organizations, everything from, as we've heard, from data quality to data standards, looking at technologies that enhance the privacy of data at an organization level, right through to ultimately to what we're focused on is a potential increased automation across those processes. So we've covered a lot in the last 45 or 60 minutes. And as a reference point, if you want to sort of refer to any of those sort of these videos or any of our webinars, you can just check our particular good practical use cases. You can check them out on our website at adaptcenter.ie. So until our next webinar, which is the end of March, which I believe is around data-driven e-health, and details of that will be forthcoming through social media in the next couple of weeks. But for now, again, I just want to thank Tony, David, and Markus, and look forward to our attendees for listening for the last hour. And we look forward to seeing you at the next webinar. We'll see you soon. Thanks, folks.